Hey, this is Jeff Wick, editor of the Fayette County Record newspaper. We are here at St. Mary's Catholic Church in High Hill for part 3 of our continuing series on the painted churches of Fayette County, joined as always by Andy Balin, and we have Wanda Stansel and Willie Schmidt, who after we talk a little bit about the headlines are going to give us a wonderful tour of the queen of the painted churches. Just a stunning church here. But first things first, ceremonially present y'all with the first edition of the new edition of the Fayette County Record, hot off the presses. Y'all are the first ones to lay eyes on the new edition here.
Okay.
Some interesting stories. Andy, you want to tell them a little bit about some of the things they can find in this copy of the paper?
Sure thing. Well, Chef, you were over in Dubina this weekend. Judge Ed had a retirement party out there. Lots of folks wishing him well in his retirement. Also over in Schulenburg, they're getting ready to paint the water tower. They put some rigging up on it. They're going to be putting a shroud over the tower and sandblasting it and painting it this week. And then last week, on Friday, if anybody got caught up in that traffic on I-10, it was a series of 18-wheeler wrecks in the westbound lanes that kept the interstate closed, the westbound side of the interstate closed for about 3 hours on Friday afternoon. Wet road conditions sent a number of big rigs slipping off the highway and wound up in the median and tangled up in those cables in the median of the interstate. Let's see, what else we got here, Jeff?
Of course, our Tuesday edition is always packed with sports. It's happened over the weekend. It was a big Friday night for the LaGrange football team. They beat Taylor 21-0. Those Schulenburg Shorthorns continue to play really well. 5-0 now.
Mm-hmm.
Undefeated.
Undefeated. They beat Bloomington 48-0 in the district opener. So they're 5-0 and 1-0 in district. What a great season! I bet everybody in the greater Schulenburg area is really excited.
Yeah, the orange and black are rolling. We are.
And let's see, LaGrange volleyball team got a big win over Giddings Friday. Got some interesting stories about some scout activities in the LaGrange area, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts.
Yep, and we have some people always enjoy reading our indictments when they come out. They're in the paper this week,
Looking for a familiar name.
As long as your name's not in there, you're in good shape, right?
Right.
Fayetteville got a new billboard sign out on Interstate 10 near Columbus, so they're hoping that's going to attract some visitors to Fayetteville.
But let's turn our attention from the headlines to the wonderful church here. And before we go inside, Wanda and Willie, tell us a little bit about the exterior of this church. We've been to a couple of these painted churches already, but St. Mary's here is dramatically different, much larger and brick compared to some of the wooden churches, right?
You're correct. This is the third church on this site. The first two were made of wood, and they outgrew them. And then they wanted a brick church. In fact, the bishop said he wasn't going to bless a church unless it was made of brick or stone, because he remembered the storms and the fires that had destroyed churches. So they were able to get their money together and build this church. And the foundation, they had rebarbs, I believe, from the railroad company, and after they had the foundation all built and it settled, the bricks were handmade down at Foster's Creek.
Wow.
And the stone that you see on the outside of the church was quarried at Baldoon. Now, when we go into the church, you will notice a discrepancy in dates. This church was blessed and was built in 1906. And you will notice a discrepancy in the dates on the windows. The windows that we see, the beautiful windows that we see in this church, were made in 1899. And they were stored back in a barn until they could build this church. So we're going to be ready for a wonderful treat when we go inside this beautiful, beautiful church. To me, it looks like a Fabergé egg. It's exquisite. Willie?
Yeah, just another point on the windows. The windows were actually, I believe, installed in church number 2. And when the brick church was built, the window frames were constructed so as to move the stained glass windows from church number 2 over to the brick church. So that's why, another reason why the discrepancy date, 1899, because they were in church number 2 and they moved over when this was built in '06. And we're glad they did.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, they are beautiful. And the names that you see on these windows, those are the names that sponsored the church. And both Willie's family and my family have windows that were sponsored, and they are in the church. You will see them when we go in among the other beautiful windows.
Wow. Well, let's go in there and marvel at this beauty. Now we're in the community of High Hill, and we're not particularly on a high hill right now. What's the story behind the name of this community?
Well, this is a German community, and German communities usually were developed as 3 communities. This was Worston, Oldenburg, and Blum Hill. And when the post office came in, they called it High Hill. And when you see from 77, the steeple of this church is projected. I mean, it is a landmark up in the sky. The cross on the steeple was damaged in the storm of 1909, the one that destroyed 2 other churches in the area. But when they went up to take that cross down, they saw a cross that they thought was 1 foot tall before they got it down. And when they got it down, it measured to be 30 feet. So it's very prominent on the horizon. Yes.
Wow.
And we're now in the narthex, and all of this was covered with I believe it was a green paint. Is that right, Willie?
Yes.
All of these walls. And Willie, when did you said your background, people did not know that this existed.
Right.
Do you want to expand on
We
that?
don't know when the narthex was painted. We assume it was probably sometime after they moved the 3 bells and got them up into the bell tower. You can see where there's a door that's cut up there, and that was taken down and the bells were hauled up right through here.
Wow.
So when that was redone, I assume that's when they decided to go ahead and paint it one color rather than try to put all of this back, which would have been a lot more expensive. And so it was hidden under paint for many, many, many years until 2010 and rediscovered, and thankfully so. It's beautiful.
And in 2010, there was a massive restoration of this church, right? Even on the ceilings. And,
All the way from the main altar back to the back door, side to side.
Every inch of the church was cleaned.
Wow. And returned to its original glory.
Yes.
For sure.
But it was not invasive work. The church was still in use.
Oh, wow.
So everything you see here, including the faux stone archways, that was all under paint. No one. We remember the faux stone. I do, because when my uncle, Father Robert Schmidt, was ordained in 1944, there are pictures that showed the faux stone over this archway and over the windows on the inside. So we knew they were there, and so we reconstructed those and brought it back to its original beauty.
All right, well, let's open up this beautiful wooden door. Is it? Tell us about this door as we're walking through it. Is there much known about this?
I think this might be original to the church.
Yes.
Is that right?
It is original. Don't know why swinging doors are important. I'm sure there's a reason, but I don't know the story.
I don't either. Some things we accept on faith.
Yes.
Now, just take a minute to look around. This is exquisite.
If you're here when people first come through the swinging door and see this for the first time, what you normally hear is, "Oh my God."
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Appropriate.
Exactly.
Very appropriate.
Exactly.
So now these pillars here. Let's talk about the style that is. You know, to make that wood appear to look so much like stone.
Well, they used turkey feathers to paint those doors. And their whole idea was to create a Sienna look. And the bottom, the base of those pillars is wood the same as the pillars. Hollow pillars. And the base is wood, but it looks like marble, as do the baseboards in the church all around. And that is that technique that was used that you'll see throughout this church, the trompe-l'oeil, the French word that is used an image to create an illusion. And that refers to the stone around the windows and the faux marble look that we see as we move through the church. On the back wall here, we have the priest and the nuns that served in this church. And I think Willie's uncle is in here.
Is that your uncle, Robert Schmidt?
And my husband's cousin, Sister Michael Rose Stanzel, is in the plaque with the nuns on the left-hand side and toward the middle.
Sister Romanos and Sister Sarah are my great aunts.
Oh,
My
how
grandma
cool.
Feetsam's
That is so cool.
sisters, right? And Sister Denise taught me at St. Rose when many years ago when I was at St. Rose School. She was our 8th grade teacher. And
So these are all children of parishioners that grew up in the parish and then went on to the convent and seminary. And the Monsignor Gerlach there in the middle, he was the pastor here at the time when the church was built. He's the architect of this building, so to speak.
Now these stained glass windows, I mean, you could marvel at these for hours, just the amazing detail. So tell us a little bit about, where these came from, and each family was, I guess, in charge of, making donations to fund the building of each one, like you mentioned, each of y'all's families?
Yes, right. And the name is at the bottom of the window.
Is there kind of a theme for each one, or?
Doesn't appear to be a theme, but they incorporated a lot of the symbolism that is important to us Catholics. Like in the middle of this one, we have the divine providence. That is the eye that we see there, and that eye is also on our money and on the Masonic Lodge. Now, I had a priest who used to be a priest in. He came on a tour. He brought a group on a tour, and he used to be a priest down in Schulenburg. And so, as that position, he did hear confessions in this church. Anyway, he said when parishioners came to confession here, they had to look into the all-seeing eye of God. He thought that was funny. Well, I do too. I think that's funny.
it's amazing to think that those stained glass windows were built in the 1890s, and look at the detail.
I know. Beautiful, beautiful work.
Amazing.
Yeah, they came from Europe, obviously.
Yeah.
And the fellow who did our restoration in 2010 said, "You are not going to get those kinds of stained glass windows anymore. Those artisans are gone, and what you get now is something similar, but you'll never see these again." So we're very proud to be able
Colors
to
are so
have those.
rich.
Now the statues of all the saints here. Tell us about those.
Well, the male saints are on this right-hand side of the church as we face the altar, and the female are on the left. And the one thing that endeared me to Catholicism, I'm a fairly young Catholic. I was confirmed 6 years ago. And I love being a Catholic, and there's so much to this religion that I have discovered, but everything has a purpose, a reason. And so all of these saints represent someone. And like St. Rose of Lima, she was the first saint in the Americas. And that is what our parish down in Schulenburg is called, St. Rose of Lima. She's patron saint of South America. And all of these other saints, if you want, we can name them all and tell you what they're about, but maybe that isn't necessary. But
Well, yeah, let's walk down this main aisle and.
But St. Isidore is the patron saint of farmers.
of farmers,
And
right.
That's obviously very important to the people here in High Hill at the time this church was built.
And then here we have Saint Francis of Assisi, and this is the saint that our present Pope took his name from. And then over here we have Saint Cecilia, patron saint of musicians. Now before we leave this area, in that very back corner, we have the Pietà of Mary and Jesus, and she is dressed in blue. She has a beautiful expression on her face.
Why don't we get a little closer look at that, because that really is just a stunning statue.
And the enclosure here that you see to the left, that was where the baptismal font used to be kept. That's where I was baptized in many years ago.
Wow,
And
that's beautiful.
The treatment of the walls in there is what was actually on the walls of this church before the renovation, restoration, or preservation, all three terms
Yeah,
are
all three
used
terms.
here, yes.
So the church was built in 1906, and it was not actually completed until 1912. Most of the ceiling and the wall, the paintings were all done somewhere between 1906 and 1912. So what you see on this wall is exactly what you had in 1912. That was discovered also as we peeled back the paint, and we decided in this little enclosure we were just going to leave this part from the wainscot on down to the floor in its original state. So that's what you see there.
And so we have Our Lady of Fatima in here. At one time she was on the high altar. And when I was studying this church, I was concerned because I couldn't find her. She was on the side altar.
Oh.
And I thought she had fallen off. I thought maybe she's been stolen, maybe she's broken. I searched for her, and it concerned me greatly. Finally, I gave up my quest, and on walking out, I looked in here, and there she is. Well, I scolded her, but she's still there.
So the interior basically was the same as the narthex, so the entrance. It was all painted one color. There was no stenciling, there was no faux stone, and all that was brought back in 2010.
And the whole design of the church is Gothic revival with these pillars supporting the vault. And that window that you're passing right there is typical of a lot of what we see in our Renaissance and Gothic revival churches. And that is a quadriform. It's 4 interlocking circles of the same diameter, and they have at the corners on this church, they have the beat, which is a very important part of the German diet, you know. So we see this here, and there's also a duplicate on the window over there, and that's repeated often in the Renaissance and Gothic revival.
So these are beats?
Yes, those are beats.
Wow.
And then on this window we have the Edelweiss running along the edge, the flower. Yes.
But again, the detail up there with the chalice and the grapes and look at the grains of wheat, the
yes.
seeds, the individual seeds. I mean, just incredible.
It's just
detail.
incredible work.
Yeah.
And these pews were made by Carl Muir. Am I pronouncing it right?
Correct.
And he installed them in 1910. He installed 42 pews. And also the altar rail and the ambo down there, which we will see in a minute.
As we've been walking, we've been passing by these stations of the cross as well, but they're another important element, artistic element in this church. Beautifully hand carved and painted.
And those came from Europe also. Didn't they?
Well, we don't, I don't know that for a fact. The church that I grew up here in the 40s had different statues,
Yeah, okay.
different stations.
Okay.
They looked a little like, if you've been to Dubina,
Yeah.
the big wooden frame with the little spires on the
Right.
end, that's what we had here.
Okay, I didn't know
And
that.
somewhere between 1940 and 1960, the stations were given away to we understand another parish who was in need.
Okay.
I assume Monsignor Gerlach made that decision.
Yeah.
I'm only guessing.
Mhm.
And then the stations were replaced with what you see here.
Oh.
Exactly where they came from, I do not know.
Okay, well that's good information. Thank you, Willie. We docents thought we were so smart. We had discovered something that probably nobody else in the world knew, and that is that in some churches the stations go clockwise, and in some they go counterclockwise. In this church they go clockwise. So here we are standing there patting ourselves on the back saying, oh, well, that's a German or a Czech thing, of course. Oh, well, we were corrected. It's not that. It's the artist's depiction of how Jesus made his trip to Calvary. And so in the 4th, 5th, and 6th station, you see the direction in which the cross is headed. And that is the procession we follow when we say our prayers to the stations during the Lenten season. Now, I have just returned from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and all of this means so much more to me now than it ever did. My life will never be the same. We walked to the Via della Rosa in the dark, carrying the cross, chanting, singing songs, and reading scripture, and it was so very moving. It's just an interesting trip. I would advise anyone that can and wants to do that, but do it before you're old. It's not a city for old people.
Let's keep moving forward here. Yeah. And we should mention the Schulenburg Chamber organizes tours of all the painted churches, and we'll include that phone number with this video. And a portion of the fee to take those tours goes back to help support these parishes, right?
Right. 40% of what a tourist will pay to see the church goes toward the maintenance of these churches. So it's greatly appreciated. And these churches don't get money from the Vatican. They don't get money from the diocese. In fact, those people are always asking us for money. So we need to take care of our own problems here. So that's how we do it. But the one thing I find so charming about Catholicism is that they know so many ways to raise money. So we do a lot. Now, I'm going to get over into the center aisle. So now, I believe this church, Willie's family donated.
I see the Stanzel name up there, and Ripper and Grossman.
This is
Still
on
common names in the
This is on
Schulenburg.
my mom's side. My mother maiden name was Stansel, and my grandmother's name, Stansel, her maiden name was Ripper. So that's my mom's side over here, and that's my dad's side over there, Schmidt and Daniel.
Oh, okay.
So we're all represented.
And those windows were installed after, those were made in the 30s, and they were put into the church well, they weren't held back from the 1931. And the two on either side of the narthex are additions that were added.
And now the ceiling here, it's actually painted on cloth, is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, on canvas, okay.
Canvas. And so are these triangles that are, you see, going up to the ceiling. And there's a lot of imagery in this church, and all of it means something to us Catholics. And one that I find real interesting is the pelican with the blood dripping from her beak. And it is said that a pelican will peck her breast and draw her own blood to feed her chicks until her own death, if necessary. That is symbolic of Jesus giving his life for us.
And we actually saw that same image over at the church in Praha. There's
We
a
did.
stained glass
We did,
window with
yes.
that same image.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the only of the four painted churches in this area. This is the only one that has the canvas ceiling.
Right.
All the rest of the churches are painted directly
Onto the wood.
Onto the wood, yes.
And during that renovation 8 years ago, all that canvas was kind of reattached. Is that?
Places where it was coming
It was coming
apart,
apart.
Yes.
reattached and cleaned, basically. And then what you see, the ribbing, that was all redone as far as gold leaf. There was gold leaf applied to all of that. That's why it's very prominent now. And then all of the gold around the trim on the altars, that was all
over your shoulder, we're looking at a chandelier. Now, that was a donation. There was a parishioner by the name of Christ, C-H-R-I-S-T, and he got quite ill, became quite ill, and his doctors told him he had to go to bed, and he could not do anything, couldn't get up for any reason. And he says, well, I don't know how I will take care of myself. And so the parishioner said, we'll do it for you. And after he was well, he donated the chandelier. And he said, now you will, every time you see it, you'll be reminded of the generosity and spirit of this parish. Isn't that a nice story?
And while we're looking up there, of course, the choir loft and that dramatic organ, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the organ dates back to 1910. It was built in Delaware. The church got it in 1930. And, I guess it's been now about 14 or 16 years ago, the Heinrich family donated $100,000 to bring it up to its beautiful sound.
$100,000.
Yeah, and Willie, isn't it used fairly often?
Every Saturday, or every weekend.
Every
for the
weekend.
Mass, yeah.
Okay.
Andy, your brother actually was a regular performer on that organ, right?
Yes, when he was still living at home and going to school here, he was the organist out here at High Hill for a few years. And
Oh, that's
my
cool.
great-grandfather was an organist here for many, many years.
Yeah. Now, we were talking about the ceiling. That design was borrowed from William Morris, the textile designer from England who died in 1850. But isn't it beautiful how the painters of this church, Stockard and Kern, made all of this work together? And the architect was a man by the name of Dealman out of San Antonio, as were Stockard and Kern. And while this church was being built, St. Mary's in Fredericksburg was being planned, and they visited this church and wanted the same architect and the same artist to do theirs. Well, I have been to Fredericksburg, and it is of this design, but it is not beautifully appointed like this one is. This indeed is the queen.
And coincidentally, Monsignor Gerlach, when he was the pastor here and kind of the architect of this church, eventually was transferred to Fredericksburg.
Is that right?
And so we don't know how much he had to do with that church, but
Yeah.
he liked this design. So,
Uh-huh.
and then Monsignor Gerlach did come back
I see.
for his
I
last
see.
day. He's buried down here in our cemetery.
Now, this window on the left here, the purple one, that was my husband's family that donated that one. And see, we got the lamb sitting on the book of 7 seals. That's from Revelation. There's so much meaning to everything in this church. Over the side doors, we have the 6-pointed star. Now, that is the star of creation. It took God 6 days to create the earth. It's also representative of the Star of David. And we have St. Anne in the middle of this one and St. Joseph in the middle of that one, connecting them to their Jewish lineage.
You were talking about the statues. The male saints are on one side and female on this side. That was also the way the congregation came to worship. All the men sat on this side, all the ladies sat on that side under St. Anne, St. Mary, and they were under St. Joseph.
Wow. When did that change?
After Vatican II.
I think Vatican II.
Wow.
Mid-1960s. And at Ammondsville, there'll be clips on the back of the pews where the men hung their hats. But that did change after Vatican II. Now here we have St. Anthony of Padua, and he is the saint we pray to when we've lost something. I was visiting with a priest down in Sealy, and he said the prayer he was taught was, Tony, Tony, turn around. Something's lost and must be found. Hey, it works. And St. Aloysius Gonzaga, patron saint of the Jesuit students, and St. Agnes, patron saint of engaged couples. Oh, we missed St. Therese of Lisieux, very important saint right here, patron saint of the florist. And of course on the wall over here is St. Anne and her daughter Mary. And she's also always with a scroll or a book instructing Mary. And there's really nothing in the Bible about St. Anne, but we have our information through the church and tradition and she was married to an older man by the name of Joachim, and they wanted a child, and when she finally did conceive, the angel said, "Your child will be known the world over." And she said, "Be it a boy or girl, I'll dedicate that life to Jesus, to God's work." Not to Jesus, but to God's work. And so she became the mother of the Blessed Virgin. And she's in all of our churches, a very important saint for us. And our altar society that takes care of the housekeeping in the church is St. Anne's Society. Now the ambo, beautiful piece of artwork, was a very functional piece of furniture in its day. The priest would preside there, and the voice was captured in the cupola, and everybody could see him and could hear him. This building has great acoustics anyway, so I don't know that there is a problem, but our presentations now come from the lectern, and we do have a microphone. So we have on the ambo Jesus and the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
And the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, the dove. Right, thank you, Andy. The Holy Spirit up there. Very important. Yes.
The last time it was used for homily, 2006, at the 100-year celebration of the construction of the church. Father Ty, who was our associate pastor back then, and he is again now, actually did his homily from the ambo, the pulpit, and he said, "This is a special occasion. The church is now 100 years old, so I'm just going to do this." He did, and everyone thought it was a good move. It really was.
And it was recently used for a family reunion, your family reunion, when a visiting priest presided.
Was
from it.
Father Scott up there?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't.
Oh, come on.
I don't remember that. You know how short-term memory is. I can remember things from 1944, but.
Now, the altar, the altars came from Silver Company in San Antonio, and the crucifix that you see was a window. It is backlit, and the parishioners wanted that to be a major focus of the reredo. So that was built with that in mind. In the background, we see the colors that were the blood that came out of Jesus' body, the water and the blood, and then also we see Calvary in the background. And all of these windows up here have special meaning. They have the nativity scene, Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus on the left, and then King Melchizedek blessing Abram after Abram had defeated the king of Sodom, and Melchizedek, the king of Salem, was awarding Abram a tenth of everything. And Abram was awarding the king a tenth of everything. And he said, "I don't want it for myself, I'll give it to those that came with me." That's in Genesis 14. And then over here we have the preparation of the depiction of the sacrifice of Isaac. We know that didn't happen because of Abram's belief in the Lord. And then the beautiful little window up here is the Jesus in heaven. And you see the three-tiered halo around his head. That is only reserved for the Holy of Holies. Then on the altar we have St. Paul and St. Peter holding the keys to heaven. Now as you look at that altar, on the top of each spire is a votive candle, red, green, and they spill over to the sides. Those are lit once a year for a candlelight mass on Christmas Eve. And it's a beautiful, beautiful service. There is some kind of a structure back there that is used to make access to them.
I was going to say,
How do you get there?
you have to have a pretty long
Up until
ladder to get to those top ones.
Up until this last year, the man that lit them was not a young man, and he was not a small man. No. But now his grandson does the work for him.
Who is that?
Buddy Dietrich.
Oh, Buddy Dietrich.
Yeah.
And the nephew is
Oh, is it a nephew?
grandson. His grandson.
Yeah, the grandson.
Justin Stang.
Okay.
You never had that job when you were an
No.
altar boy here?
I did not. No, I did not. And the scaffolding back behind the altar that allows that to happen more safely now is as a result of the construction, conservation,
Oh, I didn't
restoration.
realize it was that recent, yeah. Oh, can you imagine what it was like before that?
It was rickety. You had to put your life in the Lord's hands.
Now, I want to call your attention to the Last Supper, the depiction of the Last Supper on the high altar.
Oh, yes.
Now, that's different from any I've seen. It's certainly not like what Leonardo da Vinci presents in Milan. But, you know, I don't think Jesus said, anybody that wants his picture taken, get on this side of the table. I think it's
Right.
probably more like
Right.
it really was.
Uh-huh.
But it's the only one I've seen that's depicted
That's
that
like
way.
that, yeah.
Beautiful piece of artwork. It's done in relief. And this is a mission church of St. Rose of Lima. By that, I mean that there is no priest living on the grounds. We have two priests in Schulenburg, and they have a huge territory. These rural priests have territories. They are not itinerant priests, they're not traveling priests. They are assigned to a parish, but within that area, they have a territory. So, Father Ty and Father Tim are our two priests down at St. Rose of Lima. And they have in their territory all of the duties of St. Rose of Lima in Schulenburg, the school, and the needs of the parish, and the services in the church. And then they have Ammonsville, the parish at Ammonsville. Then they have Holman, which is not a painted church, but it's in their territory. And then they have this one. Busy, busy men.
And Mass is held here, what?
On Saturday at 6:30 and on Wednesday.
Wednesday morning.
And all of us were married here.
Yeah, all four of us that have been talking here,
Yes.
we're all married here. This church holds a
Very-
special place in all of our
Very unique.
hearts, for
I
sure.
didn't realize that was going to happen.
And
That's a
they-
plus.
How many years ago, Willie?
57.
57 years ago, and my wife Crystal and I were married here 15 years ago.
And I was married to Ted 7 years ago here.
And we just celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary last week. so-
I got to correct mine. I was 6 years. I get confused. 6 years. So you were married in September.
Yes,
Wow.
24th. Yep.
Good.
Yeah, I was baptized right here. Although that was back in
That was back in
the
there.
baptistry
Wow.
back in the day.
Uh-huh.
December 24th, 1938.
Christmas Eve, huh? What was it like, growing up in this church, Willie, as a young boy? I imagine, there's so much stuff to look at. It's probably hard to pay attention to the priest in a church like this. Your mind can just wonder at all these stained glass windows.
When you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, those things aren't really that important. I mean, you see it,
Yeah.
you take it for granted. It's a church, and yes, here's what we do, and you don't realize what you've got till later on. You go, wow, this is really
truly
something.
begin to appreciate it.
And I think they kept the young people up in the front so they'd behave, so they didn't have much of a chance
We went to school
to
here
squirm.
at St. Mary's from
Yeah.
grade 1 through grade 8.
Uh-huh.
And Mass in the mornings, all the boys sat over there. And about the 4th or 5th pew, the nuns would sit there to be sure that
Kept you in line.
all the girls sat here. They didn't have nuns. They always behaved.
And if you've ever sat in these pews force you to sit up straight and pay attention to you. They're kind of designed for good posture, huh?
Yes,
not for comfort
They are,
necessarily.
they are. And these are, of course, a lot smaller than those back there because they were originally designed for the kids. But the seating area is rather narrow, and so you have to kind of brace yourself so you don't slide right off into the bottom and create a commotion.
But as Catholics, we're on our knees as much as we're seated, so it's not a real problem.
If you come here on the Christmas Eve Mass,
Yes, sir.
there's usually a packed house, and
Right.
you'll be lucky to find a pew to sit in. People typically standing all the way around in the back.
So come early.
Yeah.
It is just at sunset, I believe. It's just as
Yeah,
it
it's
gets dark.
usually around 7, 8 o'clock
Okay.
in the evening.
And so you need to come early and get a seat.
And it's really a beautiful sight because you walk in and the lights are not on, and all you see are the votive
Yes.
lights and the lights around the manger seat.
Yes, yes.
So it's dark.
It's dark.
And it's just, wow, it's really breathtaking.
Now you mentioned there's not a priest in residence here, but the old priest's home there is now the gift shop, I guess, or visitor center for the painted churches.
Gift shop.
Yeah, it is a gift shop and a souvenir shop combination.
When is that open?
Usually in conjunction with the chamber tours.
With tours, okay.
And especially if they have a big bus tour.
Right.
But it's a volunteer job, and sometimes it's not easy to get volunteers out, you know,
Sure,
so
sure.
we do appreciate it every time they're there for us.
And the parishioners here, if they need something, there's people they can call that can come and open up for them.
It's a great source for getting memory gifts for children, for baptisms, for newborns, and also there's some neat items in there, so it's something for everyone.
And somebody could just call the chamber to arrange a visit to that, would imagine.
I imagine they would work what they could to get it done, yes, sir.
Don't they also keep it open during the church picnic?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
We just had the picnic a month ago
Yeah.
here in High Hills.
Were you here?
Yes, I was.
Wasn't that fun?
It was. It's always the best one in my opinion.
It is. and
I'll
these
agree with you on
Yeah.
that.
and these numbers are not attendance records. Those were hymns that were sung at the last service. I have people ask me, where did all those people come from?
There's probably more people than those numbers have visited this church, over the course of the last few weeks or something. Any idea how many people come on these tours?
Well, Willie and I were talking about that, and I think last quarter it was 2,000 people from the chamber alone, but there are a lot of people that come on their own. And
Right now, there's some folks just walked in on their own.
Yes,
Visiting on their own. So that there's probably
Yeah,
quite
the
a few
big
every day.
time is April, March, April, with conjunction with the wildflowers, and the weather is conducive to doing that kind of stuff. And then again in fall, October is also a big month.
And we have, maybe anywhere from 10 to 12 docents that are doing these tours. And in the spring, we were all out at one time, dodging each other to get our tours in, But the chamber has done a terrific job advertising it and getting the news out. So we're real pleased that we have this to do, and I think that this is my calling. I love it.
Well, you do a great job, and so glad y'all are able to share the beauty of this church with visitors, because like you said, I think sometimes those of us that live in this area don't truly appreciate just what a world-class treasure this is.
Indeed, it is.
I didn't realize how special it was until I moved away, until I was older and moved away and
Is that right?
went to other churches and just had no idea how special these painted churches are in our community.
And the immigrants that did these churches, they had their priorities right. They weren't so concerned with how they were going to be living, what they were going to live in. Some of them lived in hovels for 10 years until they could afford to do something differently. But their priority was to get a church and a school. And so I marvel at that every time I walk into one of these churches, and then I'm also taken back with how well they are maintained. It's just beautiful.
It's amazing.
And you really see where that comes from if you visit Germany these
Indeed.
days. Every small town that you approach, there's a church steeple. That's the first thing you see. So that's where they got it from. And when they came to this country, that's what they wanted to do.
And in Europe, those churches are so highly decorated that when they came over here, they used what talent they had and what materials they had to create what we're enjoying today.
Truly a faith that has stood the test of time, and thank y'all so much for sharing your knowledge of this place with us, and thank y'all so much for watching. It's been a pleasure doing this series.
Sure. Well, thank you for spreading the word. Thank you.
We're going to link to the Chamber's Facebook page in this video, so you can click on there to find out more about the Chamber and schedule your own tour if you're interested. You can always find us at FayetteCountyRecord.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all these videos go to YouTube as well. So thanks so much for watching, and thanks for reading.